Coming up on Arirang News, the South Korean government says it's planning to spend around $17.5 billion to pay for the next round of pandemic relief funds. It's going to be the biggest round so far, most of it to come from an extra budget. The health authorities are asking foreign factory workers to get tested for COVID-19 to stop a growing cluster just north of Seoul. The vaccine campaign carries on, 23,000 South Koreans now having gotten their first dose. And South Korea starts a new school year. The youngest kids and high school seniors will be in the classroom every day with alternating systems in place for the others. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The South Korean government has announced more details on the upcoming fourth round of pandemic relief payments for small businesses and the self-employed. This is expected to be the biggest round yet, worth around $17.5 billion. Kim Jae-hee has the details.
$17.4 billion. That's the amount the government wants to use for its fourth batch of COVID-19 relief funds, which will be distributed among almost 7 million people.
정부는 당정 협의를 거쳐 19조 5천억 원 규모의 4차 재난지원금을 마련하였습니다. 이번에 재난지원금은 4차례의 코로나 재난지원금 중 가장 큰 규모로 두텁고 폭넓게 피해계층을 지원하면서 사각지대를 최소화하는 데 각별히 신경을 썼습니다.
Some $13 billion of the stimulus package will come from a supplementary budget bill, which will require the government to issue almost $9 billion of bonds. The remaining $4 billion will come from the annual state budget. The government passed the extra budget bill in a cabinet meeting on Tuesday and plans to submit it to the National Assembly for final approval on Thursday. Of the supplementary budget bill, more than $7 billion will be used for emergency assistance for small businesses and those at risk of losing their jobs due to the pandemic, such as freelancers and corporate taxi drivers. Finance Minister Hong Nam-ki says the beneficiaries will also include a broader range of businesses.
We will provide support for a wider range of people. This includes 400,000 businesses with 5 or more employees and 240,000 businesses with annual sales of less than some $900,000, up from the previous cap of about $360,000. We will also increase the maximum amount handed to small businesses to around $4,500, up from some $2,700.
Around $2.5 billion will be used for emergency employment measures, which include plans to create around 275,000 new jobs for young adults and women, among others. Some $3.7 billion will be spent on vaccine purchases and free vaccinations, as well as compensation for medical institutions. As for the roughly $4 billion from this year's state budget, more than half will be used to support small businesses and SMEs. About $1.6 billion will be used to promote job retention, and the rest will be used to support the underprivileged. The fourth round of disaster relief funds are expected to be distributed as early as the end of March. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea's overall industrial output declined in January from a month earlier for the first time since last May. It wasn't all bad news, though. Retail sales had their biggest gain in 5 months. Paeun-ji reports.
South Korea's industrial output in January dropped mainly due to a fall in the manufacturing of electronic components and sluggish service sector production. According to Statistics Korea on Tuesday, overall industrial production edged down 0.6% in January compared to the previous month. This marks the first on-month decline in 8 months, when industrial production fell 1.5% in May 2020. The production of electronic components in January dropped 9.4% as the output of LCD panels fell. Service production edged down 0.2% as the travel and sports industries were hit hard by the pandemic. But compared to the same period a year earlier, overall industrial output gained 1.4%.
Overall industrial output in January saw an on-month decline due to the negative impact caused by the pandemic and as the country saw sharp growth in December last year.
But even with tougher social distancing measures, consumption rose for the second straight month. Retail sales were up 1.6%, the biggest jump in 5 months. This was helped by strong sales of home appliances due to the extremely cold weather and as more people stayed home. Facility investment also spiked 6.2% on month. The country's Purchasing Managers Index, which shows the direction of economic trends in the manufacturing and service sectors, recorded 55.3 in February, up about 2 points from the previous month. This is the largest figure shown by the index in 11 years, and it has been rising for 5 straight months, showing signs of an economic recovery. 배은지, Arirang News.
Revenues from online food delivery in South Korea jumped nearly 80% last year, due in large part to the pandemic. According to Statistics Korea, the value of online food service transactions came to $15.5 billion, an increase of 78.6% from the year before. Almost all of the orders, 95% of them, were done through smartphones. People have been ordering more, especially because for months, restaurants have not been allowed to let customers dine in late at night. Artificial intelligence is helping people take better care of their pets. One South Korean startup has developed a dog collar that lets you know how your pet is feeling. Another one has developed an app for your smartphone that uses a small camera to diagnose health issues. Our Han Sung-woo visited both of them to find out more.
What are dogs thinking? Big data and artificial intelligence might soon have the answer.
This AI-powered collar connects through Wi-Fi to a mobile app, and once the dog barks, it transmits a signal to the owner's phone to show what emotion their pet is feeling.
Developed by a South Korean startup, the PetPulse dog collar uses an algorithm based on more than 10,000 bark samples from 50 breeds of dog.
And then based on that, we finally detect the voice, and then separate it and analyze it, and then eventually come up with 5 very basic emotional status: happiness, sadness, anxiety, and anger, and also being relaxed.
Another startup plans to launch in March a mobile pet healthcare app called AlphaDo Pet. The smartphone app monitors an animal's health by analyzing photos taken with a micro camera attached to a thin rod. By comparing these photos with image data from across the globe, it can detect health problems from cataracts to gingivitis and even break down what's in a pet's urine.
By the time owners go to the vet, it's often too late. We hope our technology can open the doors to remote pet healthcare, especially amid this pandemic where non-contact is the norm.
With pet ownership rising around the world, the global pet care market is expected to grow from $225 billion in 2019 to almost $360 billion in 2027. So for smart pet technology, this is just the beginning. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
And time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon. And for that, I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, hope you had a good holiday. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Well, stocks on Wall Street surged on the first day of March as the spike in bond yields eased and investors bought up tech stocks. For the S&P, it was the biggest jump since last June. In the local markets, a nice gain today as well. What's the story in the global markets and here in Korea?
Yes, if you look at the U.S. market, after quite significant decline that we saw last week, for the first week of March, the first day, U.S. market showed quite significant jump. If you look at Dow Jones, it was up 2%. S&P 500 surged 2.4%, and NASDAQ actually climbed over 3%. And small mid-cap, Russell 2000, was up 3.24%. One of the strongest movement that we have seen in quite a while. The main reason for that is because of the policy front. the House of U.S. passed early Saturday a $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, and it's called American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And Senate will now consider the legislation, and most likely it will pass within this week. And on the pandemic side, the Center for the Disease Control and Prevention Advisory Panel voted unanimously Sunday to recommend the use the Johnson & Johnson one-shot COVID vaccine for the people 18 age or over. Clearly, this kind of news is going to create the likelihood of the economic recovery going into the second quarter of this year. If that is the case, U.S. is expected to grow somewhere around 4 to 5% year-on-year growth rate in terms of the GDP, and that would have positive implications for the overall global market. However, though, if you look at the Asian market, it didn't do well, despite that it didn't do well last week, particularly for China, where you saw somewhere between 0.7% to about 2% correction, depending on the index. The main reason for that is because of the possibility of liquidity actually dwindling down as the PBOC, the central bank, might take away some part of the liquidity they injected because of the huge amount of the fiscal policy that is expected to go in for the economy. All in all, still people are very uncertain about what might be happening to the interest rate and the overall economic picture and the regulatory environment and liquidity condition. So we have to probably wait a little bit more in order to see some kind of trend of the overall equity market in the future.
Well, the upcoming round of coronavirus relief payments in South Korea is going to be going to close to 7 million people, maximum of 5 million won each they're talking about, which is more than around $4,000. The government's also planning to spend in the billions to create around 275,000 new jobs for young people and women. So tell us about these plans and what kind of effect you think it might have.
Right. Obviously, this is a quite significant amount of the fiscal policy they're planning. In terms of the boosting measures, obviously, there are both fronts of monetary and fiscal policy. As for the Korean government, given the fact that the level of the debt to GDP ratio being low, the current government continues to push for the extra fiscal budget in order to boost the economy. As you said, they're planning to provide about 5 million per the company or so-called small mom and pop shop, up to about 6.9 million people. Clearly, that is a huge size of the boosting measure. On top of that, they're trying to create new jobs for the youngsters and the women, estimated to be about 275,000 new jobs they're trying to create. Clearly, these are all positive news in terms of the economic growth rate. However, though, people might be confused in terms of what kind of impact it might have on the balance sheet of the government, and also what kind of really the exact boosting measures would it be, and whether or not this will actually link into the consumption pickup for Korea, given the fact that the level of the leverage ratio of the consumers are extremely high. So yes, this is really good news that the economy might recover. But people might be worried about whether this is just going to be a one-shot thing as the spending picks up for this year. But thereafter, would that be any continued kind of trend where we see an economic growth rate on the domestic consumption side? However, though, the positive thing is that the exports are doing very well for Korea. And given that, we think that Korea will continue to be one of the better performing market and economy relative to any other global market.
Well, zooming out here a little bit and going back to the markets, this week, in fact, marks 1 year since the big sell-off last March, in which markets lost, a third of their value or so as the world started locking down. Investors saw an opportunity last year. They bought in. Stocks were back where they were by June or so, and of course have risen since then. So some of this is the first-time investors with some stimulus money in their pockets, and the Fed even buying ETFs last year. What do you say to the fears some have that we're in a bubble that's going to pop?
Well, yes, I think that people might be concerned about that. However, I think that we have to think about what's happening to the economic growth itself. Clearly, you're not going to have a bubble, if you consider that as a bubble. It's not going to be popping when economy is growing. When economic growth rate comes through and that results into the earnings growth rate of the overall companies, then the equity market tends to move up even higher. We do estimate that the overall earnings pictures are going to be quite positive for this year, at least for 2021. Question mark is that whether or not that continues for 2022. But in any case, we think that the corporate earnings are going to be looking quite good with all these boosting measures that's happening. As for Korea, as I said earlier, if you look at the overall export numbers, it is growing at 20% plus year on year. That is very positive news, and that affects quite positively for the corporations in Korea, particularly for semiconductor businesses as well as automobile businesses, electronics, EV market as well. So clearly Korea seems to be well positioned for the overall next era of the fourth industrial revolution. So if that's the case, then we think that it is a good entry point rather than thinking about popping the bubble. We do estimate that the fair value of KOSPI is expected to be about 3,700 versus current index of below 3,100. So we do think that over the next 12 months, Korea market can gain at least somewhere between 15 to 20%, and that the first-time investors should be looking at that as a positive news. But however, though, in terms of where you invest, you should be focusing on those companies who have global competitiveness, including Samsung Electronics.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Yu. I always appreciate your insights, and thanks for coming on today.
Thank you very much.
Now, the latest on the COVID-19 situation in South Korea. There's a growing cluster of infections among foreign workers in the city of Dongducheon, just north of Seoul. Today, that cluster added 88 new cases, all but 4 of them foreign nationals. The authorities in recent weeks have been asking foreign workers, including illegal immigrants, to get tested. They've been offering tests without the need to give personal information, instead contacting the person's employer if the test comes out positive. But this makes investigations time-consuming, so they're also doing more tests with personal data included. Today, across the country, there were 344 new cases. It was the third day in a row there have been fewer than 400. There was 1 new death reported. And South Korea's vaccine campaign has now given a first dose to more than 23,000 people. There have been around 150 people reporting mild side effects. The government's also engaged in a campaign against fake news regarding the vaccine. Choi Jung-yoon reports.
South Korea reported 344 new COVID-19 cases on Tuesday, the third day in a row that the number of new cases has stayed below the 400 mark. Of the new cases, 25 came from overseas and the rest were transmitted domestically. With 1 additional death, the death toll has now reached 1,606. Meanwhile, 1,442 people were vaccinated on Monday. Health authorities have confirmed that since the start of South Korea's vaccination program last Friday, 23,086 people have received their first dose of the vaccine. That means 1 out of every 2,500 people in the country has had their first dose.
Considering the 3-day holiday over the weekend, the participation in the vaccinations was high. With more speed this week, we aim to vaccinate as many people as soon as possible.
156 people have reported mild side effects such as fever, muscle aches, nausea, chills, or skin rashes. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency says those mild reactions showed a fast recovery and are common symptoms that typically occur when the body's immune system reacts to a vaccine. Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun on Tuesday's meeting also pointed out the fake news surrounding the vaccines.
False information, like how the vaccine is made using the DNA of an aborted infant, and those who are vaccinated will have a seizure and turn into zombies. Though these are absurd, they're spreading online, causing distrust and concerns over vaccination.
He said despite the efforts of health authorities and the police to eradicate misinformation and fake news, these contents are easily found on social media. Emphasizing the role of the Korea Communication Standards Commission, he also called for swift action from lawmakers to overcome the months-long political deadlock and get the commission up and running. Choi Jung-yoon, Arirang News.
South Korea began a new school year today. Some kids will be going to school in person every day, including the youngest ones and high school seniors. Schools have some flexibility in deciding when everyone else will come. The authorities say they're trying to take the burden off parents. Kim Do-yeon has the details.
Students in South Korea returned to school for a new year on Tuesday, starting their spring semester on time, unlike last year when it was delayed for 2 months. As of now, kindergartners, first and second grade elementary school students, and high school seniors will go to school daily. The other students will spend some days in the classroom and others having online classes. It'll be up to each school whether these students alternate their time in school on a daily or weekly basis. But schools that report a case of COVID-19 have to resort to only online classes. The current social distancing level of 2 allows schools to have up to 2/3 occupancy, but if the level is raised to 2.5, then only 1/3 capacity is allowed, and at level 3 all classes will return to remote learning. The push for students to go back to school comes as the difficulty of keeping online classes for younger students and providing care for them is taking its toll on families and working parents. With students coming back, the schools have measures in place to prevent the possible spread of COVID-19. Student teachers have their temperatures checked when entering the school and must wear a mask at all times. The desk must also be arranged to keep a distance between students with clear walls separating them. The Ministry of Education has said it'll assign 2,000 contract teachers to help out students with basic educational support during in-person classes. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, the national security chiefs of South Korea and the U.S. have reaffirmed their commitment to coordinating closely on North Korea and maintaining peace and stability on the peninsula. Seoul's national security advisor, Seo-hoon, spoke on the phone with his U.S. counterpart, Jake Sullivan, for about an hour Tuesday morning, Korea time. They also reaffirmed the strength of the bilateral alliance and exchanged views on other regional and global issues, such as addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and fighting climate change. They agreed to push for a meeting in person when the COVID-19 situation eases. And just when the weather seemed to be warming up, with temperatures hitting 16 degrees Celsius in the capital over the weekend, there was another blast of winter this Monday and Tuesday. Gangwon-do Province saw the worst of it, with up to a meter of snow. Our Kim Yeon-sung reports.
Winter isn't over just yet. Heavy snowfall in Gangwon-do Province started around 9 o'clock on Monday morning and continued until Tuesday afternoon in some areas.
The inland regions to the west of the Taebaek mountain range saw snow until Tuesday morning. In some mountainous regions near Gangwon-do Province's east coast, it's still snowing and will continue until 3 p.m. today.
The most affected regions saw snow pile up to almost a meter high. And on roads and highways, the snow caused traffic chaos. More than 700 cars were trapped along a 2-kilometer stretch of highway for more than 6 hours. Kim Se-won, who was driving back to Seoul from the east coast city of Sokcho, was stuck in her car for almost 12 hours.
There was a truck in front of us that kept on sliding on the snow. There was so much traffic that the snow plows couldn't come in. All of us in the car didn't drink or eat at all because we couldn't go to the bathroom.
During this chaos, 1 person died and 94 were injured in car accidents. Work is underway to reopen roads in Gangwon-do Province. But snow clearers are finding it hard to reach some places due to the region's mountainous landscape. On the first day of the school year on Tuesday, 66 schools in the province were forced to declare a snow day. And meteorologists say that this might not be the last snow of the season. They forecast another snowfall coming to Gangwon-do Province this weekend. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Almost a year ago, South Korea passed the so-called Minsik law, named after a 9-year-old who was run over and killed by a speeding car in a school zone. And as part of efforts to protect children, by this June, the city of Seoul will have installed speed cameras at every elementary school in the city. As of 2019, there were only 86 speed cameras in school zones. Last year, they installed almost 500, and with 400 to be installed in the first half of this year, the total will rise to 1,000. They'll also install more in school zones near kindergartens and daycare centers. And for kids crossing the street, there'll be speed bumps and LEDs installed in the crosswalks. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.